community was struggling like there's nobody's business. So like we feel like for you guys because you're going through a rough patch here, but like, you know, with some of the things that we have implemented in and obviously, you know, with our community support and our district's passion to try to get some, you know, some protocol in to be able to help, like it can be better, you know what I mean? Like, and I think that's just the idea that you guys provide hope to the district too, that this can be better. You know, it doesn't have to be this way.
It sounds like, I mean, I'm listening to Marcia, and unfortunately, we had to get better at it. I mean, the situations kept presenting themselves. We had to get better. We had to figure out how to honor kids. We had to figure out what was okay and how to talk about it.
Right.
It's not something probably any of us wanted to get better at, but
yeah,
you have to.
Hi, I'm Dr. Natalie Marr, and this is Jennifer Zenz-Olson, and we are Women of Wellness. This is our last panel that we interviewed, and it's a unique panel. It's a community group from a local school district who in the early 2000s went through a similar pattern of multiple suicides in their high school and around the area. And what we wanted to do, because we knew this community has done a lot of work since then to be more prepared for crises in general, we wanted to just glean some of their wisdom and learn a little bit about what their process was. So that will be what you see in the following video.
So we have Marcia, Mike, Laura, and Keith all joining us to share a little bit about their stories and their experiences in the community and how they ended up approaching teen suicide.
I think one of the things that I've learned about suicide in 20 years as a guidance counselor is that it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care what race you are, what gender you are, what your socioeconomic situations are. And I think a lot of people will be surprised during the course of their lives that they will have to deal with it. And that was my experience for sure. I will never forget it. The first day of summer, 1995, and I had been working at Vandenberg, and I came home and was just kind of relaxing, and I get this phone call from my sister-in-law, and she's just screaming in the phone, and she's saying, he's been acting weird lately. He's been like he is crazy. And I says, okay, just kind of slow down a little bit here and tell me what's going on. And she told me he had committed suicide, my only sibling. You know, we grew up in a family, very nuclear family. My parents were married for 50 years. We did things together all the time. And he and I were best friends growing up. We did everything together. Okay? And you know, when I think about it, going back to childhood, you know, and adolescence, if you were to look at the two of us and said, which one of these is going to commit suicide? It wouldn't have been him. Not that I was suicidal, but just because he was so confident. He was, you know, more intelligent than I was. He's a better athlete than I was. Just all those things. But when he committed suicide, it changed our family for sure. And I've taken that from that experience and tried to apply it as a counselor for 20 years and to help kids who are thinking about suicide and who are trying to work through those feelings.
So as always, one of the things that I reflect on is Keith's vulnerability. And we're pausing just shortly to kind of talk about this being one of his greatest assets, and one of the reasons I think that we talk so much about that term in this throughout this whole video series, and how to really be willing to sit with your feelings and share that with other people, and he does that so beautifully, and it's what he did in the classrooms and panels when he was engaging with high school students about
Imagine
suicide.
that. Imagine being a teenager and listening to somebody you think of as an authority figure,
exactly,
sharing that story.
And it, like I said, and I've talked so much about him throughout the series, and you guys have seen him throughout the series, but I really think this is just a moment to kind of outline his capacity to sit in that and what that did for the community and the kids around him. And so that's really kind of one of our hallmarks of what we want to look at it and sort of encapsulate that concept as a tool down the road here. So it's the reason we want to just outline his beautiful story. His very, very sad and beautiful story, but his willingness to sit with us in that and share that as well. And so that is something that we are super grateful for. And so next up, we're going to be listening a little bit more about other people's personal stories as well.
And for me, I mean, I'm constantly watching the kids as the panel is discussing, looking to see what their emotional state is. And, you can tell when kids is starting to cut deep and it's starting to hurt, and that you're going to have a discussion with those kids. And they really do appreciate the vulnerability of the panel.
That's how we created connections. It's sad that you create connections after a crisis event. But that's how we broke down some barriers there with students, because when they saw teachers crying, they knew we really cared and that they could come and talk to us.
I think related to that too is like acceptance of kids. The culture was no one talked about depression and anxiety. I think of, this is going back a little far, but if my mom would have come out and said, my daughter has depression and anxiety, she would have never said that to anyone. And the culture has changed that I can say that. I mean, my daughter struggles with it, and I had to reach out to people to help. And I think that helped me in working with kids too. Like, I get it. I know, what you're feeling. And even if I don't have the personal experience, I mean, I believe kids. I want to help kids. I accept kids at their face value, what they're telling me. I'm not judging them. I'm not saying, oh, you're not anxious about that. Well, why would you be depressed? I mean, because I feel like that has been a definite change in culture. It's just the acceptance of mental health and understanding.
And again, here in this clip, I feel like what we're seeing is vulnerability and the way that the different people have responded to talking and dealing with teens. The thing that really, I think, grabs me right out the gate is the focus we're going to have with this group in particular on recommendations. It just fell solely in the camp. We were listening to the clips again. We were like, recommendation, which is really beautiful at the end here as we near the toolbox. But what I really love about this group is, as a whole, was that they really see the value in the teens and kids they're serving. They don't minimize them. They don't invalidate them. They see the intrinsic value in each and every teen and kid that they are dealing with. And I think that that's a gift. I think looking at those people as human beings, and at the end Laura's talking about, I see them, I accept them at face value.
Right.
And where she's going there
and I believe them.
And you do, you can feel it as you're talking with them, and I've worked with some of them, so I know exactly what they do in the form of what that looks like when they're working with a student. But it's absolutely phenomenal, and that's another piece of the tools I think we're going to want to really deal with and dig into, because that is really treating a kid as a human being.
Yeah.
You don't want to treat him as an adult. I understand that, but I think if you think about how you would like to be addressed as an adult, give that to a kid and direct your energy at them that way, understanding that they're not going to have all the wisdom and sense, right? I get that. I get we need to be cautious about that, but I still think that there is an energy about how we deliver our time, and
the connection.
It is the connection.
I know we keep saying it over and over, but that is why we call the series a call to connection.
Absolutely.
There's a tangibleness to how they do the things they're going to recommend that we do.
Exactly.
It isn't just in the doing of them, but in the how they do it.
Absolutely.
That makes a big difference.
And that makes them so successful. And so each of these people is just doing such an incredible job. And you'll hear more from them as we go throughout the rest of this video. But I just really wanted to outline, as you're watching this video, watch for the ways they treat these kids as human beings. They don't treat them like condescendingly. They're not minimizing their experiences, or they're full on in treating these kids with this incredible respect. And I just think it is such a beautiful thing. And so I wanted to outline that here to set that tone for the rest of the video, so you all could kind of keep your eyes peeled for that little piece.
Yeah. And the next section, we are asking the group to talk a little bit more about what their formal education and experience was working with teens with mental health issues, and in particular with suicide. We ask all of the groups that, but with this group, it's a little bit more unique because they're professionals working with teenagers. And so we did want to kind of dig into what is it that they were taught or that they were asked to do for training or any of that prior to coming into working with teenagers.
I've said this too in Mike's class. I don't know, maybe I was just naive. I just didn't think going through the whole counseling program at St. Cloud State that it was that suicide was a big deal. I mean, depression was talked about a little bit, but I mean, other people did some stuff with it, but as far as training, we didn't get any training there, So it was all fly by the seat of your pants. And try to do some research and, base it on, my experience with my brother committing suicide.
Right.
Yeah. So it wasn't much help what I got, for sure.
I think my experience with preparation, we took, a class that included mental health and included different topics, and, was instructed about mandatory reporting and like the steps you should take. But it did not at all prepare me for the first time a kid was in front of me and told me they were suicidal. So there was like the technical training, but what it actually felt like or what it was to, work with a kid in that situation, I don't think you could be prepared for. I think one of the interesting things, having the perspective of been in a school for quite a while, in the beginning, we didn't have the tools and the resources and the people on staff, and if a kid was suicidal, we called, in an ambulance and sent them away, which probably created more trauma for them. It was just like, that was the response. Like, what do we do with kids suicidal? Let's call somebody and send them away. Now we have, co-located therapists in our building, and we make connections, and we can get them right into somebody who can help them immediately. Less traumatic. They're surrounded by people they know. Our counselors are involved. Case managers are involved if that's the case. I mean, there's just people that it's a supportive network, not just oh my gosh, a kid's suicidal, we got to call 911 and send them away.
The teaching portion of it, we had some mental health classes, and then when going into administration, I had some more on that aspect of mental health for students, but also for staff. Took a look at some of that piece.
Yeah, so besides the 3 credits of counseling that I received in college, I mean, honestly and truthfully, like I was just thinking about this today. Like, there wasn't a lot of mental health like discussion even in my college prep stuff as far as teaching it. I mean, there was a little bit about self-esteem, but like really, like we didn't have a lot of discussions about that. It was a lot of physical health, which, to be honest with you, like I think more of my teaching now is more mental health than anything, and so we kind of gravitated away from that. But I would agree, like the district has done some professional development stuff, like during workshop days and stuff like that, to give us, some information. I don't necessarily know if I feel 100% equipped to deal with it. Like, I haven't had like formal training, and so that's something that we've asked for. Like our health teacher has asked for us to receive that type of training, maybe in whether it be some form of professional development or on-demand training or whatever it is. So that's kind of what would be after, but not a lot of training, no.
So not a lot of education, which not very surprising.
Right.
But one of the things I really just want to point out here, so we've heard from all of our other panels that health class is a place where mental health gets talked about with teens. Great, I'm glad. And here's the health class teacher, Mike, telling us he only had 3 credits in college. That's significant to me.
Yeah.
You know, now Mike's a unique guy, and so he goes on and does more.
Yes.
And not every health class teacher is going to do that.
Right.
So that's disheartening to me. You know, we spend all this time in AP this and honors that and wanting our kids to have all of this education under their belt before they hit college, but we don't even want them to know how they function as humans in the world. That's really, I think, significant.
Exactly. And it's telling that Mike chuckles after he says he's got a dry sense of humor. He's like, my 3 credits of counseling. But I love that he has clearly taken upon himself, once he started to really realize that. He said somewhere in this video, he talks about the fact that there was emphasis on the physical well-being.
Yes.
And I thought that was super interesting. And then as he was practicing, he started seeing like, oh, there's so much more emphasis in mental health for these kids. And so he naturally then dives into doing more work and finding education around that and emphasis in that so that he can support, and he does that in a beautiful way.
Right.
But again, what Natalie said is true, is you can't guarantee that's every teacher or that's every experience, right? But 3 credits is probably not really nearly enough for what these teachers are facing in school. I just don't think it's sufficient. And so I think we need to arm them with the information to be able to sufficiently do their jobs and feel safe.
And I'll also say, in a time where money is important.
Oh, absolutely.
It's always been important around our education. I'm not even asking us to better teach the health class teachers.
Right.
You have mental health professionals in your community, some of which might volunteer their time, but it's much less costly to pay me to come in and teach a class on that every semester for your teens than it is to beef up your health teachers to be able to do so. So I think that there's even some really, and we can talk about this in the toolbox more, but I think there's really some very fiscally friendly ways to get that education in there in a way that's more impactful for the teens.
And you can just make sure too that even their CEUs and things like that, the teachers have options to go in and dig deeper into those pieces and creating some policy around that. But I agree with you. I think there's some really creative ways, right? Rob said earlier in one of our videos, how might we? And I think that's really a big piece of this, is how can we come together and not just rely on one camp or another, but rather everybody come together to support this process and make it easier and more accessible. So next up, we're going to be listening to some of their ideas on the barriers that they see in terms of treating teen suicide.
I think originally, like I said, when we first call and we would send kids, or we would have parents bring kids, no availability. We don't have a bed open. We can't put them in a hold. They would show up the next morning at 7:05 at school and nothing had changed, or not, there was no intervention of any kind. They left us at noon and they came back the next morning, and we just didn't have the resources in the community, which is why I think we ended up bringing those resources into the building, because we couldn't get them outside of the building. We couldn't count on there being a space for a kid. We have one barrier when we've talked about all the school barriers. But I'm thinking of the parents I've worked with and the barriers they have as far as access to health insurance, being able to get their kids to therapists. Even if they want to, sometimes they can't afford to, or we've, back in the day, sending somebody in an ambulance. I mean, that could mean a huge financial cost to a parent.
Yes.
And yet, no one wants to err on the side of not sending a kid. And so, I mean, I feel like there's a lot of financial things for parents that present barriers too, that, we want to do our job, but then we have to look at what are we doing to a family's finances, or how do they get their kid to therapy, even if they think their kid needs therapy, if they can't get them there and they can't afford a therapist, what can we do? Those are real barriers for parents.
I had a couple cases where kids left in the morning, and by the end of the school day, they were back in the building. But part of it is, there's no beds, and I think part of it is, as much as we've made progress, I think there are parents who want to deny that their kids have issues, and I always tell the story about the first time I had to deal with a suicide was when I was a counselor at Vandenberg. And the kid came in March, and he's a kid I'd known for the whole school year. He's a ninth grader. Okay. It was a junior high then. And all of a sudden he comes in, he says, I've been thinking about committing suicide right out of the blue, I said, well, okay. I had no training, remember?
Right.
So right. I knew, I said, well, I have to call your mom and, tell her what's going on. And so I got her on the phone, and she says, you know what? I told him what he told me. And she said, what, is he talking about that again? He's just looking for attention. And that was March, and he committed suicide in July. So I don't know. Part of it is some parents are real receptive, but other parents, don't want to admit that their kid needs help.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
The point of not having enough either beds or resources, and Keith telling the story about the teen that left school feeling suicidal, came back the same day. It was like, oh no. And so Natalie and I were off camera talking about how it's sort of like a game of not it. Yeah. And not in a way that people don't care. So roll with this, but I actually think that's a beautiful analogy. Mm-hmm. The school has this teen, not that they don't care, suicidal, unsafe, and then they go, ooh, emergency, we need to send you to the hospital to be assessed. Right. That is the order of things, okay? Right. So that's a normal process. And you send them to the hospital, and the hospital goes, I don't have a bed.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. And then you toss them back to the parents, and the parents go, oh, I don't know what to do. So then the kid goes back to school, or, right? We resume normalcy or whatever. Or maybe they get help. I'm not making any assumptions there. But I think you can see that the resource piece is huge.
It is
because
huge.
If you're tossing the teen to somewhere, like here, right. Hopefully you can help, and I can't, but hopefully you can help, right? We don't want it to turn into a game of not it. Right. I do think that that's a huge piece here to emphasize. I like that analogy of like, ooh, let's not do this with a teen life, right? Here, right. Punch, here you go, and good luck, and hope that works. Our system, I would like our system to work better than that to capture those kids. I think that's really dangerous.
It is really dangerous. It also it highlighted one of the barriers very well that they speak to later when we kind of talk to this idea of community resource and collaboration as one of their recommendations, one of the main recommendations that came from this group.
Absolutely.
So it makes sense and comes together later, but communication is important.
Yep, absolutely. So here comes some more of their barriers and ideas on things that are maybe not working so well that we could stand to take a look at.
The piece that I don't think you could ever truly be prepared for is the emotions that come out. That has come out almost every time that I've worked with a group of students after one of their friends completes suicide. They knew things. The student had said things to them. And it's working harder with them to get them. We got to do more to get them to talk beforehand, because the guilt afterwards for them is what breaks my heart. But we could always be more prepared, because no one reacts the same.
No.
And you never know exactly how someone's going to react or what's going to happen. And this is about suicide, but this is all about crisis. I mean, it's even with death or with a major trauma in the building. It's something that I don't know if we're ever totally prepared for, but we can just know what we need to do, I think.
One of the barriers that I think really exists still is time. When we started paring away some of these skill-based classes and that stuff that is exactly geared toward helping those kids with their mental health, like resiliency skills and teaching them about grief and teaching about that.
Yeah.
And we just get away from that, and then we hope that the kids are going to somehow get that some way. But I don't know if they're going to work on the skills that those kids necessarily need, like refusal skills, like with teaching kids to not do drugs and alcohol. Like we work on those skills in class. Where same thing with mental health skills. We learn about resilience and how do you bounce back? How do you deal with disappointment? And those things I think can be taught, and our kids need those skills to be able to succeed, to be successful, or to feel like they can be successful. I personally think that you have to give kids a ton of tools in their toolbox to be able to do that. I don't like when something's shoved down kids' throats, like this is the way that you're going to be calm, because it's not going to work for everybody. Right. But I do think that at the middle school level, I hear a lot more teachers who are using those types of skills than at the high school level. I would think a math teacher, an English teacher, would be so ill-equipped just because they're not dealing with this on a yearly basis like I am with my kids. When something happens, we're so reactive sometimes. I like to really concentrate on the prevention part. I mean, obviously being a health teacher, and so how can we prevent it? And I think our district does a decent job with that, and that they have some stuff for us. But I just really think that we need more health education in our schools. And especially mental health. Yeah, that's where I think we really need the help.
So Marcia and Mike have some really good points here that we wanted to stop and just kind of speak about. One that Marcia brings up, and I think she'll say it more than once throughout, is that you can never be emotionally prepared for this. No. All of the education that we could put these leaders in our schools through, you would never be prepared. And the truth of the matter is, as mental health professionals, and I teach new mental health professionals as a clinical supervisor how to do their jobs, we're never prepared when people are suicidal. Yes, we're prepared, but emotionally, there's always a catch, in your throat when you're somebody that's helping someone through a moment like that. So I love that she brings that up, because it is something that we're contending with, no matter how many resources and how much preparation we do. Yeah.
Just having, and again, I like that terminology of having the scaffolding, or that, skeleton, so to speak, to work under. Even though we're going to have emotions with it, if we have a plan, we at least know we can go into action and start doing our plan, right? And so then deal with the emotions as we need to, which is a piece of this. But I think that's really beautifully said by her. Yeah. And I think my one of the statements she makes here that just really is gut-wrenching is she talks about the guilt for the students that are left behind after a suicide, and how she watched some kids really struggle being aware that they knew some things, and that's that's just a gut painful experience to go through. And you can tell how much she loves her kids by the pain in her face about that. But that's something that I know she doesn't want other teens to have to live with, because that's a really horrible thing to have to live with.
Right. And on the other side, she also, as a leader, wants us to have connections with those kids, not just to help them, but to help the kids that they know about. Because the other thing that does is it creates, people want to clam up. They don't want to talk about it. What you find after a successful suicide, when you start to get kids to talk, is they knew a lot of stuff that had some adults known. Maybe we would have been able to catch this differently than we did.
And then Mike talks about, and this is a great point from my perspective, because I am a certified yoga instructor as well, but I think one of the neat things he mentions here is the mindfulness. And it's been very successful in the middle school where they are, and not so much in the high school. Now, I'm not exactly clear whether that's teen-based or administrative-based, but I'm going to say this, that I think it's interesting that it's successful in the middle school, where that's become a matter of course, it's just available and accessible. And really, and then Mike goes on to say too, he's like, well, and mindfulness might not be everybody's, jam.
Right.
You're exactly right, Mike. I think that's so true, that this might, but everything isn't for everybody ever, right? No. So the idea being that I would still love to see resilience being taught, right?
Yeah.
Mindfulness, resilience. It doesn't matter what it looks like, but having those tools and skills, I think, are huge for our kids, and that's something we want them to be trained for the rest of their lives.
And
right?
he does say that we need to keep, like, so the barrier is that we're very reactive in how we plan and not necessarily always proactive.
Yes.
Now, what you're going to see is that this school district was able to expand and become much more planful and preventative in their measures.
Exactly.
But yes, that one of the barriers that we're up against, and we saw in our other panels, is that we tend to be more reactive than proactive in our education and in our training.
Right. Yeah. So next up, we're going to hear a few more of their barriers.
It's finding folks that want to work with our middle schoolers that are willing to be in our building. We just finally have one now at Vandenberg.
Okay.
It's been a long haul. I mean, that's the piece, I think, that we've just been working really hard to find a therapist, a full-time therapist for Vandenberg.
Okay.
There just seems to be a myth out there about middle schoolers, and they're great to work with.
I was going to say, money is definitely a barrier. I mean, Marcia, you said you have a full-time therapist?
Finally, yep.
So you have one person for 570 kids. Correct?
Yeah.
Yep. Therapist, yep.
Yeah, right. I mean,
yeah.
But one is better than none.
You can talk about this better than myself, but just talk about the role of the counselor.
Oh yeah.
I mean, at the high school, and at the middle school, I'm sure your job changed so much from over the years to being test givers and right.
You know, you would get other things as assigned. You know, like I had to do for about 3 years. I had to do this special project on teen driving and
texting.
What?
Texting and driving.
Well, yeah, we did a program through the homerooms for teen driving for 11th graders. We also did a attendance deal for 9th graders. Okay, the attendance deal I can kind of see, you know, but it was kind of something that admin kind of forced. Well, what that meant is hours of my time that I couldn't do my real job, you know, they just evaporated, you know, and there's only 6 hours in a school day, you know, and some kids will stay after, you know.
Sometimes we try to do the very best with the limited resources that we have. We do a lot of the times try to put as many resources as we can.
Sure.
And when I'm talking resources, I'm talking people resources into classrooms.
So Marcia here points out something I think we've kind of spoken to before, which is this idea that it's hard to get resources in the school. It's hard to get a therapist in the school. And then, you know, Keith mentions, so you've got one therapist for 567 kids in her middle school. And that, you know, we were doing the math once on the high school where it's over 3,000 kids, and it just doesn't, you know, it doesn't work out.
30 plus therapists. We did the math on just one mental health issue.
Yeah.
And I think we came up with it would look like having 30 therapists on staff, just for reference. So it's a shame. It's clearly that's not sustainable.
Not sustainable. One of the biggest barriers. Keith and Mike also riff a little bit on counselors have multiple roles, like, and they keep getting stretched more and more thin. And so even at the high school level, when you have identified people, they might not have 100% of their time that they can
available
give to the kids in that capacity.
Because they're being asked to do so much. And then Marcia talks too, you know, always trying to utilize resources as best they can. Of course. I mean, I think that's a piece of what every school is doing. And I think it lends itself though to that same idea that we need to be creative about resourcing, right? That there's so many people out in the community. There's people that are willing to volunteer, people that you can hire to come in very part-time. And again, is that actually fiscally more responsible or accessible than always looking to your exact school staff the way we have it? You know, how might we do that different, right? And so I think that's just she leads right into something that I think is just one of those messages that we are so passionate about.
Very much so.
Which is resource usage. Yeah.
Next up, we're going to speak more to stigma specifically as a barrier.
I'm licensed in EBD, you know, and you think of those are the kids with the identified behavioral disorders. Those are the kids we need to watch out for. And they're not. We have people around them. They are supported. They have connections. It's those kids that are not connected or out there that, you know, don't have someone in their corner necessarily, or some of, you know, I think that was what surprised me with the suicides that happened at Rogers High School was they were athletes, they were A students, they weren't the kids I was working with, they were other kids. And so it's not like it fits a mold or there's a certain kid that is suicidal. It can be any kid.
I think that's changed in the 20 years plus that I did this. And, you know, I think I told this story one other time about, you know, this teacher, and he's a really good teacher. He's retired now, but you know, kids connected with him. But when I told him what I was doing, I said, "Oh, you can't talk about suicide. You know, it's just going to cause more suicides." You know, and I think we've come a long way from that. And it's a whole bunch of things that have helped out with that. I mean, I think the crisis management piece that Marcia talked about, you know, I think that's a big part of it. I think the yellow ribbon is a big part of it, you know, and just using the school to go beyond and go into the community. And I think that's changed the culture. I really do.
Keith's story about having a colleague that is reluctant, even now it's been a little bit, but even then, someone that Keith held in high regard was like, hey, if we talk about it, I'll cause it. And so we just wanted to nab this idea in particular. There's other areas of stigma that you guys will pick up as we talk. I think things that just sort of naturally come through, but this was really the one for us where we thought, oh, we still have people who are out there that truly believe that just talking about it is going to encourage it.
Good, well-respected teacher. I mean,
absolutely.
That's
not meant to be an
Keith
insult.
describes him. This is a really good teacher.
Somebody really liked, right?
These are some of these barriers. The stigma piece is a big deal.
Right, exactly. Mm-hmm. So as we mentioned earlier, we knew that recommendations was going to be a hot spot. So next we're going to lead into the beginning of their sharing about their recommendations and ideas and how we might make some improvements in this area.
We talk at Vandenberg a lot about Vandenberg family and about caring and taking care of one another. That's hard to teach how to have, you know, gain those relationships or get those. And so that's something I think comes naturally for folks. And those are the people that you need at the forefront or in your safe rooms, or those folks that can reach out and create those connections just instantaneously. This year, we're being very cognizant of making sure that every student has one adult connected. And so they did a survey of all the teachers first and asked them, who do you know really well in the building? So they could connect kids with teachers. And this was from my counselor and social worker. And then they asked kids to see if it correlated and where were the blank ones. And then when we had blanks that some kids didn't feel connected or teachers didn't have any they connected with, then we really started working hard on that, so that we had 570 kids that had at least one caring adult in our building. And then COVID hit, but you know, we'll continue to work on that. But we need to ensure that we've got, I've got a little boy that follows my head custodian around, and he loves it.
Yeah.
But at least they know that there's one person that they can go to, and we've been working really hard on that. And we really work hard to make sure that we have the right people in our buildings.
Males sometimes have a hard time showing it, but like the vulnerability, like 20 years ago, I wouldn't have told a student that I loved them because I would have been afraid that would have been taken weird or however that might have been done, right? So now, like, that message is being delivered by just lots of different teachers and, adults in their life. And that's one of the things that I think is really helping, that people are knowing that there's people that are caring about them. Not that we don't still have kids fall through the cracks and struggle.
Sure.
I think they all feel as though someone there is looking out for them. Those kids that don't, I think there's an eye out for those kids a little bit more than there had been in the past. And you recognize that a little bit more. I think that's a really important piece, is that early recognition that someone's not doing okay,
We started this section of recommendations with a focus on connection and vulnerability, because it's such a big point in our entire series. Right. And Marcia does a really nice job of leading in to this subject matter. I love how, as a principal at her school, she has started this really unique way of creating connection by identifying an adult for every kid, or letting every kid have an identified adult, right down to her custodial staff. I just think that's pretty amazing.
It is, it is. And then I love too that Mike talks about the vulnerability and how sometimes it's not necessarily as easy for men and young men to talk about their feelings, but how he uses language around, I love you, and shifting even the way that he deals with them, again, to always be creating connection. Right. These some big and some very small moments that he's having where he's trying to create that connection. And that's just a beautiful example of what Marcia's getting at, is doing those small things and making sure that every single kid feels seen and feels like they have somewhere to be.
Right, and feels that the teacher feels that they would catch if they didn't feel like they had if the kid didn't feel like they had a place. Yeah. Which is also, I think, a beautiful way of making sure that teachers are seeing things and catching them early, if possible.
Absolutely.
So the next section, we're going to talk about a little bit more recommendations around this vulnerability connection issue, and we'll hear from some of our other speakers.
We just had some incredible kids who opened up and told their story to kids, and I think that's a real important piece to what happened to change the culture, as far as I'm concerned. I think that's a really important piece for us as adults, is to listen to kids.
Don't you think that the panel that we bring in of parents and Yellow Ribbon Project and community members, I mean, that's all they do. The whole hour basically is they show vulnerability, and
correct.
Like, the kids just connect with that so much. It's unbelievable. Absolutely. I mean, you wouldn't believe how many kids walk up to the panel, kids that I wouldn't think would do that and thank them or give them a hug. And it's just like, and for me, I mean, I'm constantly watching the kids as the panel is discussing, looking to see what their emotional state is. And, you can tell when kids is starting to cut deep and it's starting to hurt, and that you're going to have a discussion with those kids, and they really do appreciate the vulnerability of the panel. I mean, I personally think there's been a ton of lives saved because of the panel. And what I always think about that is that, I don't care how they get the help. I don't care who helps them. I just want them to be able to feel like they can reach out to somebody. And again, sometimes they're talking to community members who are up in the panel, and they're just all of a sudden letting loose on something touched. Like, you don't know as an adult, some kid is going to, throw that at you. Right. And so it's pretty cool to experience. It's an exhausting day.
Oh gosh, yes.
Yeah. emotionally exhausting for sure.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
But it's always a day that I think is a good day.
Vulnerability is one of the key factors that we know is going to help increase the ability for all of us to process around these issues, right? Teen suicide in particular, but mental health issues, anything. Vulnerability is the key in.
Yes.
And so when Keith talks about, I just love that he nabs this idea again, kids will do more than we give them credit. So at the beginning of the video, when I said, right, treating kids as human beings, teens as human beings, they're think of talking like an adult with that respect, right? He's going here and saying they will show up for us.
Right.
If we ask the questions, if we show up and we're vulnerable, they will show up, and he's absolutely right. I love that idea. And so one of the things for me that I think really resonates is that when we know that kids go to kids, right, they're going to go talk, they're going to rely on their friends. That's a normal, healthy aspect of developmental growth. However, can we harness that? We've already talked about some of the ways that might not be so great, right? That if they're relying on their friends, who knows what their friends can do with that information. However, this is a beautiful idea about how to harness teens working with one another, where maybe having them involved in those panels or small groups, things like that, we're actually utilizing that in a very healthy and productive way that we can help funnel, if that makes sense.
That it totally does. And the panel Mike speaks to is a whole other aspect that I really want us to highlight here. It's a great way to help bring community into the school, help connect kids to adults outside of even school, family, youth groups, because these are parents, these are family members, these are people in your community that have been affected by suicide, speaking to these kids directly. And Mike does explain, like, he can just watch the kids and can see when it starts to hit them, and opens them up. I mean, that vulnerability really just opens them up. And this is to people that they may not have known under any other circumstances.
Sure.
It's also a beautiful way to highlight that talking about suicide does not create suicide. Talking about mental health does not create mental health. It creates a space to have conversation. It creates safety to share even some of their own experiences.
Exactly. And that I think is just such a beautiful way to outline the factor of vulnerability and how it shows up. And so for me, this was just one of the key pieces of this video series, and talking about the set of staff that we have here are doing that in spades.
So next up, Mike and Laura, our teachers in this group, are going to speak a little bit more on this concept of vulnerability and connection.
Well, number one, I'd say you need to listen to your kids. I think sometimes parents, and I know I was guilty of that as a parent, but we need to listen to their kids. And I always viewed teenagers as 5-year-olds in big bodies. I mean, they're still kids. They need guidance. You can't just say, oh, they're 16, they can drive, and just let them go. You have to make sure you have a level of communication with them.
Absolutely.
With your own kid, so that they will talk to you. And then when they do talk to you, listen to you.
Kind of closely piggybacking to that, trying to get your kids' perspective. It's easy for us as adults to say, well, that's not so, a boy broke up with you, big deal. Or, even with the COVID thing going on, like, oh, so you don't get prom, who cares? No, they're important things to kids. And that's all the context they have, is what's going on in their life. And they don't have the perspective that we do. Like, yeah, boy breaking up with you is not that big a deal. You'll get over it, but they don't have that perspective, and they don't have like the years of experience to look at things. So I think really understanding where kids are at, wherever they are, even if you don't agree with it or you can't see it, understanding that their perspective is their reality.
Yep.
If you were to walk into my class on the first day, you'd probably think I was the meanest guy in the whole wide world, because I laid on the line. But then as I go through, the kids start to realize that the reason why I'm that way is because I love them and I care about them, and they're going to be successful in my classroom. And so I think you just got to give that attitude. And, you know, one of the things we learned as young teachers was to be out of your classroom, the door, and greet them as they come in. You would not believe at how important that is. And some of those handshakes that you see people do and all that stuff like that, like, I don't do that, but like every day I comment on a sweatshirt they're wearing, or, you know, they don't have shoes tied, or get those headphones out of your ears, laugh, laugh, laugh.
Yeah.
You know, what you're listening to, you know what I mean? Like, you have to try to make personal connections a priority. Because if you don't, like, they're not gonna pay attention to a guy who knows everything about the curriculum. They're gonna pay attention to a teacher who they know is there because they love them. And I tell them straight out, like, I'm here, I want to be here. I'm not here because I have to be here. You're a class of 32 kids or 36 kids, or however many we have in our class. But you know what? You know when the kids are not doing very well. You know when they're struggling. Maybe not every single day, but if it's routinely coming to this class disheveled or looking like, you know, they had a tough weekend or whatever, and just taking those opportunities, like, there just can't be enough of that being done for our kids, for sure.
I love when Mike says that you can look at teens like 5-year-olds in big bodies.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And ironically, he doesn't mean it in the derogatory way that it sounds. But what he's getting at is that same theme of just treating teens like people, right?
I also think about Nicole, though, when he makes a statement like that, who is like, yeah, we're like 15, 16, 17. We don't know what we're doing. I mean, these are kids.
Right.
They're still very early in their development as well. And so as adults in their lives, we hold a big position with them, but you also are doing it in such a way that you're doing the dance around not making them feel like, we don't take them seriously. We don't hear and understand that they have their own perspective of how things are in the world.
And Laura speaks to that maybe in one of the most beautiful ways, from always meeting kids where they're at. And it's something that we talk about very early in the series, which is just seeing them for who they are, that their things feel real.
Right.
So for us to look at them and invalidate or act like it doesn't matter, okay, so that breakup for you, or that thing, that test you failed, or whatever it is, that does feel monumental to them.
It is
and so in our lives, we need to think about a failed presentation or a job we didn't get, right? It's making those connections between our experience and theirs, and understanding, right? We know they don't have all the wisdom and experience yet. We can't expect that. And yet they long to be treated with regard and respect.
Right.
Every human being does. And so meeting them there first, I think, is such a beautiful way to grow connection.
And I am reminded that our brains all work the same. So our brain is going to go to its own experience, and it's going to weigh and give, gravity to things based on its own experience. Just because teens don't have as much as adults doesn't mean that it doesn't feel as monumental to them as it does to us. And so if you think about it from that direction, like, their brain is working the very same as ours. It just has less to reference back to.
Exactly.
But that doesn't make it less important at all.
Right. It's like having a third of the encyclopedia set.
Correct. Absolutely.
It's like having a third.
And you now age both of us, because we both have encyclopedia sets.
We should have talked about the interwebs. Instead, I went to encyclopedias. You're welcome.
It's all good. But and Mike also speaks to this idea that you need to connect with these kids. So Laura wants us to understand, like, make sure to give them the appreciation that their experience is important and meet them where they're at. And Mike also says it's our job to do that connection, like standing at the door and saying hello and making mention of what sweatshirt they're wearing or whatever is as important as the delivery of whatever he's going to teach that day, and then creates the space where he has these connections to the kids.
Yeah, it's so beautifully said. And he said they might think I'm the meanest teacher, but what they quickly see is how much I'm actually invested in their success.
Yeah.
And so he doesn't give up his authority to those connections. And I think we want to see that those things can come together. That's boundaries, and boundaries are healthy, right? So we need those as well. But he just nails it for me. I'm like, that is just speaking right into the heart of the matter for these kids.
For sure.
So next up, we're going to be talking about recommendations in terms of collaboration with schools and the community.
the perspective that it's not necessarily a 911 that we send somebody away and increase trauma, that we call parent, like we involve everyone. We call parents, we call admin, we have, the trusted teacher, whoever they talk to.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a different response now than it was, 10 years ago even. Mm-hmm. It's not me making a decision. It's all of us, putting our heads together, and maybe someone else knows the kid better than I do, or maybe I know the kid best, and we all work together instead of just feeling like you're alone making that decision. And I know our counselors didn't want to be the person that was, picking up the phone and calling 911 every time, because that wasn't working either.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. They might get taken away and then they'd show up the next morning at school because there was no bed opener because the parent took them home. You have to meet parents where they're at. Some parents have been on this journey with their kids' mental health for years and years, and they are responsive and they know what to do and they know who to reach out to.
Right.
And some parents, this is the first time that it's been brought up to them, and they, are either in denial or they really honestly aren't in touch with what's going on with their kids. So some of it involves parent education, like bringing the parent in with the same services, like where are you at, and supporting them as much as we're supporting their kid. She didn't take this on by herself. She is willing to listen to people and collaborate with people. And, Marsha's not sitting there saying, well, I know all the answers. I know how to do this. I got this. Everything that you have said, Marsha, it's a team approach. It's the flight team. It's the counselors we have. It's the teachers we have. It's the community people we have. That this isn't something that you have to do alone, ever. That could be said to parents. That could be said to kids. That could be said to everybody that we're talking to. This doesn't have to be something you do alone. Not everybody is equipped to handle this. And, I have a coworker who admittedly says, I'm not good at this. I don't know what to do. And, it's been weird because I've been in situations where like another kid's case manager was upset that their kid came to me. And I'm like, really, that's what you're upset about right now? Like, that's not the thing we need to be upset about. If you're not the person that can handle it, or you're not the person with the answers, find those people that can and do and will. Just being the escort for a kid to get them somewhere safe is enough if that's what you are capable of doing.
And I think we as the educators need to stay curious and not judge our parents.
Yeah.
And keep asking those questions, because a lot of times when we continue to ask questions about tell me more, I don't quite understand, or help me with that, more comes out. And what we hear when we're getting the pushback is they're really concerned that we're judging. Their parenting, and they're afraid of that, and that's not the piece. We're just concerned for the child, and they're concerned we're going to judge them for the child's mental health. And we know that a lot of that has to do with chemicals in the brain and some other things that come up. So who knows where this is coming from at times. And it's just staying curious and letting those parents know that, as Mike said, that we love them too. It's part of our community, and we're all family. We're going through this together.
What I'm sharing with my parents at conference time, and when I get times to speak with them, I always tell them, that you have to validate their feelings first before you start trying to fix everything. And, my wife always says to me, she goes, you're really good with our kids, my own kids, because like you always say, I'm really sorry that you feel that way. I'm sorry that you're going through this. And my wife tends to be she wants to fix everything right away, and I always share with the kids this aspect. I say, you ever went home to your parents and said you failed a math test? The kids, yeah. And I said, and then your mom says you should have studied more. Well, of course I should have studied more, but I'd like to hear, like, I feel bad that you're feeling bad. I wish you weren't going through this. I wish that there was some other way that I could help you, or is there a way that I could help you? But I think just having people understand that you care about them and that you care that they're hurting, I think makes all the difference in the world with what they don't need to have advice. They know a lot of times what to do.
Right.
They just know that they have some really bad feelings.
Laura's talking about the idea that they have moved away from just utilizing, right, calling 911 and having the ambulance show up. And what happens is it creates this kind of traumatic experience for kids and staff. It raises all of this really kind of anxiety, you know, in the system. And so I love the idea that as they've done this work with kids, they have developed a way that's like, we need to work within our system first and utilize all of our resources. And one of the beautiful things she talks about parents, and we're going to get there in a moment, but also about this idea about having a bridge.
Yeah.
And so where I think we want to go is developing that concept within every system of having those bridge staff and human beings that even if they don't feel ready or able to attend to something, that they know where to go. So if a kid shows up and says, I'm unsafe or I'm having a really hard time, I don't know what to do with myself, that person then knows where to go. And I think that awareness is just a huge piece of where I hope we'll get to go.
Uniquely doesn't have to be like the school counselor or the person,
the custodian.
It is. Yeah. I think in Marcia's school, it may even be those unique adults that attach to that particular child that may be your bridge at any given moment.
Exactly. And that doesn't require a mental health training. It requires the ability of knowing where to go next and how not to necessarily freak out, right? But to be present and aware, stop, drop, and listen, and then walk that teen or child somewhere to get them to safety. Yeah. And so I just think that idea just really was like a hit home for me.
It does.
For sure.
It does. And all of these folks speak to the parents, right?
Absolutely.
And in a little bit different way, but I think it's worth speaking about because parents are an integral part to helping their teens, and we need to help them. They are the bridges in some ways as well.
Sure.
The kids don't just live at the school, and so these people uniquely are school related, and you're going to hear a lot of their recommendations are as well. But I loved that they brought up that we need to help our parents as well, and that we need to talk to them. We need to help them understand. Let's help our teens like validate their feelings first, I think Mike was saying. And Laura and Marcia just are, highlighting, they probably feel like they're being judged.
Oh, yes. And they do. And in our offices, we hear that.
Right.
I think they get afraid to step into things with us for fear of thinking that others are going to think that they're bad parents.
Right.
And that's absolutely untrue.
It is untrue. It also, I think, could scare some people from not wanting to talk to parents, like not wanting to appear like they're judging.
Right.
And so then
it's both sides.
Not try and give them some resources maybe to work with the teens that they have at home.
Sure. But if we start talking about that, right, if we make that, again, just like the conversations around suicide and mental health, if we're talking about this openly, we create awareness, and hopefully we're starting to destigmatize that, right? Take away the sting of that we just see one another as those bridges and those links, and that it's the beauty of all of us coming together that's going to create the magic and the success. It isn't one party or another, right? And so it's all showing up together that I think is really going to make a difference.
Yeah. So again, we're just going to speak a little bit more, or listen a little bit more to these people speak about this idea of collaboration within community.
Absolutely.
The one thing that I know that helped at Vandenberg is after we did have a student complete suicide, we still did our memory event for that student because he was a valued member of our Vandenberg community, and I had some pushback on that, but that student was going to leave a legacy there, and we needed to honor the legacy and the memory of that young man. And so we did it just like we did for any student death throughout our time there. And students saw that, they honored it. People always tell me that you can't get 570 kids to be quiet. Yeah, you can. That student's legacy and memory will not be forgotten. That's the key phrase that has to be in that. We have a strict script that I kind of stick to, or else I'll go gollywagging off onto other things. But so we stick to a script, and the kids perform. We've had, when we had a Native American student pass, that our drummers and dancers came and did a thing for them. When we had a young lady pass that loved Michael Jackson. The band played, I think, Thriller for her because that was her favorite. And so it's just they really do, and it's just one thing for each one that's something special.
Yeah.
Just to show the parents and the BMS family that we did know and we honor that child.
Yeah.
You know, and we had one student pass that hated homework, so the band played Homework Blues. You know, and the parents loved that piece. So, you know, just trying to do different things like that and handing out forget-me-nots as the kids leave so they can plant them at home, just something to signify that they can have something to take with them. Other schools do different things, but we just want to make sure that the kids know that student will never be forgotten. But we had a lot of things set in place that could make that occur.
Yeah.
You know, with our safe rooms,
right,
with the flight teams that came in, with this guy named Keith Howard that showed up on the doorstep that came to help out. Because I only have one counselor in my building, and so Dave was just overwhelmed.
Sure.
We had extra administrators that were there to take over lunch duty or other tasks so I could be out and about with the rest of the staff. So, and that's just the way when one school's grieving, everyone in our district is grieving.
I think it's really important to do those kind of events and you're right, it's not for the kid, it's for the survivors, right? Mm-hmm. You know, so I think as a community, we help the family, the parents and the siblings and the school by having that. Mm-hmm. You know, okay. The story I told about the kid who committed suicide in July. Okay, his dad lived in Colorado. He came during Christmas, between Christmas and New Year's, and he contacted me before. And he said, "I just want to walk through Vandenberg," because that's where I was working at the time, just to see where my kid went to school at the end of his life. Oh. You know, and so if you have those events, that helps them.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think they're really important.
But my guess is, Keith, wouldn't you think that if we would ask Jaden Cervella, if we would ask, you know, Mark, if we would ask some of the people that are on our pension panel, and we would say, would you guys have liked to have a memory event? I gotta believe they would say yes. I mean, it's a person that we're honoring their life. I mean, it's just, to me, it doesn't make any sense not to do it. But yeah. I don't know the research inside and out. You know what I mean? So
this is a really important topic area. Yeah. We've talked about it through the series, kind of skated around it. We will talk more about it in the toolbox as well. What I love, though, about this group is that they have been doing these celebrations of life, not only in response to suicide, however, they have in response to suicide. Right. And it's been a wonderful experience for their communities, for their kids in their schools, for their staff in their schools. They incorporate having the parents come in, and all around, I think that we just wanted to really point out what a positive experience that can be.
Sure. And there's so much controversy around this. I mean, we have talked a lot behind the scenes about this subject because we know it's a hot topic, you know, whether to do these things or not. And so in doing some research and reading, a lot of what they really recommend is that you treat all deaths in a school the same way. All doesn't matter what. And then if you're going to end up doing some memorial type things, that you just set limitations around that. You know, we do it for 5 days, or, you know, and then we're moving on. And so there's not this lingering, and you don't have to talk about the specificity of the death. That's not really what we're after. We're just talking about the life, right? You're honoring the life. And what memorialization is for the people that are still here.
They're still here.
Right? And they want to honor, they need to honor. There's something really powerful about that. So I I really love how they've, I think, captured this idea and do this so beautifully with so much heart, but also in conjunction with parents, the schools working with the parents. It is, and the community is, I think everyone gets to be involved in this in a really lovely way.
Which is why we put it in this particular category of our recommendations. This is a collaborative effort.
Exactly. Exactly. So next up, we're going to be talking about some recommendations around being prepared for crisis in general.
And that's why it's so important to have those resources available or have things prepared ahead of time that you're ready to go when something like this hits, because those emotions will hit you. You try to be a doer and go through as an administrator, but you need to be there for your kids and for your staff and get those folks going. We've done multiple things now in Elk River for suicidal awareness and preparedness. And we brought in Sherry Lovery from the Crisis Management Institute, which has really helped, I think, us have protocols and awareness how to do that. We use the Crisis Resource Manual and her training manual so that we have safe rooms and flight teams. That's why the district takes this piece on for us, because the folks in the building are grieving. And so that's why it's so important that we have, our flight teams come in and take care of our kids, and district admin come in and help out. So our prevention specialists are sitting right there. I had my assistant Soup sitting there with me. We were crafting letters. And then I could leave. She could finish the communication, and then I could leave and take care of my staff, take care of my kids. But that's why our prevention specialist really is the one that kind of coordinates those volunteers that are coming in, and I run through there. Because when we have outside folks that maybe aren't volunteering, but we pay them for their time too, the district will be the ones that will find the funds, because I don't have extra money. And so they will help me with that piece, and they will pay. So it's phenomenal that we have that system set up.
I know that was a big part of
everything.
where the whole district went.
Yeah.
And we flew her in, and I when I left the manual for whoever replaced me, and it's where the flight teams came from, so when there was a suicide, counselors from Rogers and Zimmerman would come in and help, and they didn't have connection with the kids, but they could take care of other things, and allowed me to deal with the kids, so Marcia's absolutely right. That's a huge piece.
One of the most positive things that came out of the experience in this school district in the early 2000s was this specific training that they brought in Sherry Lovery. She has a very specific training that she does for preparedness district-wide.
Yes.
And Jen and I mean, it was when we started to hear about this from Keith that we invited this group of community members in. We were fascinated by this concept of not being complacent and doing something different so that you were prepared district-wide, not just for suicide, because it's really crisis training. And I think that both of them speak to that. But they weren't complacent. They knew that this could happen. And so they started as a district to be very different in their approach in helping these kids.
Yeah. And I think the neat thing is that what happens is, and we've talked about, if we do this, the hope is that you never have to use it.
Absolutely.
So the irony, is it sounds sort of like this fictional, like if we do this, but what are we going to use it? But that's okay. I'd rather all of us have a scaffolding, a plan of action, than have nothing and then we're in reactivity mode, right? And I just don't know that any of the best things are going to come out of a reactionary experience. So I absolutely love how they outline Sherry Lovery's work here and what that can do then for them as a team to come together if needed to support the kids and the staff. And then what happens is people can come in and support them from other areas. So they don't have to do all this. It's deeply emotional. And so when Marcia says, You can never be prepared for the feelings. She's nailed it.
Yeah.
You can't be prepared for the feelings, but what we can do is allow others to come in, to kind of swoop in and hold us, make a container for our school, for our staff, because everyone's grieving. When there's a loss, car accident, illness, suicide, everyone's grieving in the school. Specifically, you need people to come in and kind of hold that space for you.
For certain you do.
And so how neat is that there's
Which
this,
is the best way to prepare for emotions you can't prepare for.
Is to have that support and love kind of come in and kind of help hold. And so I thought that was just an awesome way to kind of approach care in the community that way. So next up, some recommendations on education.
There's just resources there. Even in the 6 years since I've been there, there's been resources that people are using. I talked to one of the young adults afterwards, and I followed up with her, and she briefly talked about it that night, about how community ed was doing some stuff with mental health with preschool kids, and to me, that's very cool. I mean, that's being proactive, not reactive.
Well, and I'm hoping we see that shift. Mike, you said high schoolers don't accept it or don't, know about it, or they're not as easy to convince. But I feel like our district has really put that into the elementary ages. And I'm thinking, or I'm hopeful that, 5 years from now, when they're coming in as ninth graders, they'll be like, yeah, I know this stuff and it works. And it'll be like high schoolers will be doing it too, because it's something that they've done since kindergarten, or, it'll just become part of what we do.
We also have a daily advisory where we advise that, and we do teach some resiliency. I mean, it's not every day resilience skills, but we do have some of that built in there.
Okay.
At Vandenberg, we have different months that we work on different topics and things along those lines. But
I think there are two types of teachers here. There's teachers who connect with kids and teach curriculum, and then there are teachers who just teach curriculum. And I think one of the things that I learned along the way, and Mike does this, it's okay to talk to kids. It's okay to comment about, their t-shirt, their sweatshirt. Then they know you're human.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. It's okay to talk to parents. I think some teachers, especially younger teachers, they're intimidated by parents, when they're 22 years old and they're talking to a 40-some-year-old, but it's okay. They want you to talk to them. That would be one of my messages. When kids weren't in my office, I'm either on my phone or doing emails, and right next to the phone, I had this thing that said, stop, drop, and listen. So when a kid is there presenting himself in front of you or herself in front of you, stop what you're doing, drop everything, and listen to what they have to say. And that really helped me when I like I said, I don't know where I got that from, but it was some kind of workshop. But it was, that I would tell that to teachers. I think it's important. And the one that I mentioned before too is break the no talk rule. Mike brought it up before.
Love.
That's really important. And again, Mike does that.
If they're going to talk to an adult about either themselves or about other kids that they're friends with who are struggling, okay, I come forward and I say that I'm thinking about committing suicide, or my friend is thinking about committing suicide. What the hell is going to happen? Like what's the process, And, because they're really afraid that there's going to be all this commotion and, like you said, ambulances showing up and people being strapped to stretchers. And it's just amazing. And then when you go through the process with the kids that I've had a few times, it's like, they're just like, that's it. That's the it's like really reassuring that like things move really quickly, but there's a lot of help and there's a lot of love. Well, you know what I tell them? You tell me, like I tell all the kids, if you tell me, like I'm telling, Like I'm not. Like, I'm not going to keep it in. So don't tell me if you don't want me to help you, because I'm going to help you.
Right.
But the thing is like when you tell me, if you don't think I'm freaking out a little bit inside, you're crazy. Because I am freaking out a little bit because there's a life on the line here. Like it's life or death, and I'm going to call 911, or I'm going to get the counselors, or I'm going to get people involved who are going to help this person, because like I don't want it to happen if I know about it, you know. And I think kids, I think they find power in that there is going to be something that's going to happen.
Kids would come in and say, I'm worried about so-and-so.
Sure.
Okay. But I'm worried they're not going to ever talk to me again.
Yep.
Every time that happened and they finally told me, and they came back, and the kids aren't pissed about it.
No.
The kids, they realized that they had a true friend who was concerned about them.
Why would they tell you?
Yeah.
Why would they tell you?
Yeah.
If they didn't want, what do they want you to do? They want you to help. You might be the 13th person they've told.
Exactly.
And 12 other people were busy with life, like a lot of us get. And then the 13th person is told, and then they say, I'm going to help. Like, I'm going to do something about it. So, like, when you put it in that frame of mind for them, I think they start to figure out that, yeah, I mean, if they wanted just to commit suicide, they wouldn't tell people.
In our toolbox, I know we're going to talk more about this.
Mm-hmm.
So I will try not to say too much because that's coming up as well. But I will say that I really love where Laura talks about beefing up what they're doing, and that some of the education already happening in the elementary and the younger levels is already starting to kind of beef up, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's lovely, that idea of increasing education way the heck back in school to sort of normalize and have that be a part of our vernacular, our language, the way we talk about things, and our awareness from the time that we have, children in school. I think that's just an incredible idea. And one of the things, and I will try not to go on about it here, we'll go on it in the toolbox, but one of my soapboxes is definitely this idea, Marcia talked about advisory. And one of the things that I know that happens is that as kids age, often one of the things that kind of comes out of their school day is that homeroom idea, or having an advisory where they're coming together with the same small group to kind of check in the day, do attendance. They do some, maybe schoolwork from time to time, and there is extra bonus, whatever. But what an awesome opportunity from my perspective to do some of this work we're talking about. We're talking about educating kids. And if we don't find the time, what about putting an advisory back in place so that those kids are with the same small group throughout their educational experience in a year, with the same teacher, and we provide tools where they can be doing some of the things we're really visiting about in that space. That time's allotted, right?
Yeah,
I love that idea.
Right. I think that it, Marcia's school has adults that each kid connects to. Right. This is kind of a way, within the context of having a high school of 3,000 kids and not a middle school of 567, big difference.
It is.
To give that kind of connection. If it's the same advisory teacher that's seeing you every day throughout a school year, they're going to notice if there's blips. I mean, first of all, attendance being one of those, but just even changes kind of subtly in emotions could get picked up on there. Keith also brings up this idea of we need to connect with these kids, but he also is speaking to two of the rules that he created. I think he even alludes in here to that he was taught the stop, drop, and listen. And so then he wrote it down and had it on his desk. Yeah. But there are ways that we can actually teach teachers, counselors, staff in high schools to connect. I mean, it doesn't come naturally to everybody. We certainly have 4 individuals here where that's a gift that they just have. I mean, it's just part of who they are as people and how they show up in the world. Not all teachers are equal in their ability to do that. Certainly not all staff in a high school are, because not all are even trained to work directly with the kids necessarily. They might be more on the administrative side, but these are really small things that we could do that have big impact, I think.
Absolutely. And Mike earlier had said he felt like newer teachers, and even like math or science, I think he refers to teachers, might have like kind of almost a little bit of a, not a deficit, I'm not saying this well, but like he's trained because he's teaching health.
Right.
He's already in that realm. So for him to kind of grow into that and grow resources and connections and things like that is kind of part of his job, where somebody that's teaching another subject might not even come into play with this as much.
Yeah.
So if we're making this space for an advisory and a connection, maybe we're building on that regardless of what you teach, right? And so I love this idea so much. And of course, Keith's ideas of stop, drop, and listen are just brilliant. Then breaking the no talk rule. He talks very clearly about this, is that's one of his main things, and it has been for years, is we have to be able to keep talking about this.
And Mike spins it into more, how do we prepare kids to have these conversations, or what should they expect? So you have a friend that discloses to you that they're thinking about harming themselves, or have been harming themselves, or thinking about committing suicide. How do we train kids or prepare kids to know what are they going to expect to see from their teachers, counselors, whatever, when they disclose that information to the adults in their lives? Like, how are the adults going to act? And I like how personal he is, because he also says, like, if you think I'm not going to freak out, you're wrong. And again, it goes back to what Marcia said earlier, like, you can't prepare for the emotional response. And I think that part of preparing kids is adults feel this too, and it's okay that we do. So don't expect me not to have emotions about it, and don't expect me not to do anything when you come to me. Here's how it'll look though. So let me prepare you for it ahead of time. And how do we build that in long before a kid chooses an adult to talk to? Just like, this is what you're going to expect to see from the adults in your life if you need help from them.
Right. How does that work? And it's what it's doing is it's reducing anxiety for teens and kids. Because if there's, again, a scaffolding, we use that language a lot. If there's a scaffolding, it's less anxiety provoking. I might still be nervous, but I now have this like layout plan of kind of what it might look like, what it might feel like. And Keith really nabs the kid portion of that. Kids are afraid. If I go talk about my peer, my BFF tells me that they're feeling suicidal, and I go report that somewhere, are they going to stop speaking to me? Are they going to not be my friend anymore? So we have to create space for teens to process about this, and kids, honestly. So when I say kids and teens, it's interchangeable, because I think it starts sooner than even being an adolescent. But I really believe we have to be preparing them. We're prepared for things. We prepare for job interviews. We prepare for tests when we're going to take them. We are prepared so that we can go in and have confidence. I think that kids are not being given these tools, and I think that that's just a huge piece of them feeling like they can be more successful or be more open to utilizing resources within the school system, their community, and their families.
Right. So next up, just a little bit more on this recommendation of education.
Don't be afraid to ask the question, are you thinking of killing yourself? And you'll get the answer. I think we skirt around it and we try to dance, and instead of just asking the question. By asking the question, you're not going to have somebody go out and do it, but you're going to get the answer, so that then you can react appropriately and the way you need to act in order to help your child.
I am so glad that Marcia brought this up.
Me too.
It of course has to be something that we're all comfortable asking. Are you feeling like killing yourself? Have you had thoughts that you would be better off not around anymore?
Dead. Harm yourself?
Would you?
Right. It's suicide. We have to be willing to step in and use the language.
And use that language.
Right.
These are heavy thoughts, right? So think about that, because we're all scared to say it because it's a heavy concept. And if I, as the adult in the room, am not ready and prepared to ask it and own that heaviness, why would I expect this teen under that much duress to want to disclose that to me? Why would I expect a teen to want to tell me about it if their friend has told them? This is heavy stuff. And so I really just loved that she brought this up. We all have to be prepared to talk about this and to use that language. It seems inflammatory. It seems heavy, because it is, and we have to make it safe. We have to make it okay.
And we have to be able to, developmentally, we know that one of the biggest tools we ever have raising children is mirroring. And so if we don't step into this and use that language, and even though it's hard and we're uncomfortable, we feel anxiety, we feel fear, there's a lot of things maybe going on for us. I think we have to be willing to mirror that ability to sit in this hard stuff for them. And so we are often going to have to be the ones prompting this conversation. And it outlines we've talked quite a bit about this as well throughout the entire series, is the language that we're choosing
For sure.
is so important. And when we steer away from things, when we back away from things because they make us uncomfortable, someone instinctively feels that.
Yeah.
Right. And we said teens are like the best bullshit detectors on the planet. And so the minute that they sense that I'm starting to back away from something, they're going to back away from something. So it's about this leaning in. But the language that we use is absolutely crucial to me.
Right.
To really nabbing this and getting to the heart of the matter, and not, like I said, tending to kind of move away from things that make us deeply uncomfortable.
Yeah. It's what creates stigma. I mean, language is what forms constructs, and so this idea that it's the unsaid big white elephant in the room, I'm not going to talk about it, creates stigma around that concept or that construct. And you're right, of course the teens are going to pick up on that.
They're going to follow our lead. So next up, messages to the community.
Well, I would say to the community too that it truly takes a village at all times. We are all just part of this huge family. It's the human family, and we need one another.
Well, I think kind of related to what Marcia said, it's not that kid in that family or your kid in your family. It's our kids in our community. It's not singling anyone out, or there's not that stereotype of what kid that is. It's any kid.
This message, these ideas in this section are just so beautiful to me, and because they nab this sense of community that, and they mean it within the school system, but I think really at large. It's this idea that it takes a village and that we're all in this together. And I know Marcia in particular will talk about, like the family, the school family, the Vandenberg family. And so this is very much this, they're creating with their language they're using this concept of family and being together as a community. And so I absolutely love that concept. And then where Laura comes in at the end and she says, it's all in how we talk about it and think about it.
Yeah.
It's not your kid.
It's
right. When we start pointing fingers and it's right. It's that game we said, not it. We have to stop doing that. And if we don't say it's your kid or that kid or this, it's our kids.
Yeah.
These are our kids. These are our teens. This is our community. When we begin to take ownership and even using language around that, I think it shifts the whole game.
It does shift the whole game. It reminds me of you and I sitting in Starbucks when we first started talking about this. I mean, I wanted to do something about this. These kids that passed away this past year were not friends directly with my son. They went to his high school with 3,000 other kids. So it wasn't something that directly affected me, but it directly affected me because I feel like these are our children and this is our community, and these deaths they weighed heavy. They are big deals to me. They were big deals to you.
Absolutely.
And it's really what started this whole series.
Yeah.
So it is a really beautiful message and very much resonated, I think, with both of us.
It does. And I think if we can come at it with that idea that this is a responsibility for all of us.
Right.
This idea that it's your job or your job or your job is just a way to kind of pass the buck and be not it. And the fact is that it lands solely with all of us.
For sure.
This responsibility to address this, right? We can do that. I can't necessarily eradicate every single death. I can't eradicate suicide. I wish we could. But what we can do is try to create this environment where we're able to come together and work more effectively and have accountability around it, right? Stop passing that buck, but rather step in rather than stepping out. And I think that idea is just incredible. Yeah.
And now our 4 speakers are going to give messages to teens directly.
What would I want to tell teens about suicide? You know, there are people in schools that care. Mike Cross cares, okay? The janitor at Vandenberg cares. Marcia Welsh cares. You know, there are people in schools that care. Your parents, believe it or not, care. Okay? They might not seem like it sometimes. And sometimes, you know, the doing adult doesn't allow them to be there as much as they should sometimes. But they care, okay? And I think it's important that you know that someone out there really cares about you on a personal level. Okay, you might not see that, but you know, I don't know what else to say.
You know, this world is a difficult place, and there's a lot of people who care about you and love you, and that you're gonna blow it, and you're gonna make mistakes, and we're gonna forgive you, and we're gonna move on. I think one of the biggest lies that's told to kids is that this is the best time of their life, and when people say that to them, I mean, could you imagine being young and thinking about committing suicide on a daily basis and being told that this is the best time of your life? I mean, Jesus, you know, there's great parts of every stage in your life. And I think my life is better now than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever the case may be. I think we have to give them a sense of hope that it's going to be better. But I think the love part of it for me is probably the biggest part that I want them to understand. And I do think they need to know that us adults blow it a lot, and that we don't always recognize it, and we don't always give them the attention that they need. When you watch the parents on our prevention panel, I mean, it just crushes you. Our kids, when they watch that, they know that those parents love their kids and would do anything to have them back. You know, so that would be my biggest piece. Is just, we love you, and love is hard. You know, it's not clean all the time.
My message. I'm trying not to get emotional because, like you said, I keep thinking of individual kids and what would I say to them. I think I've said it to a lot of kids. This moment in time does not define who you are. You know, your mistakes don't define who you are. Your 15 mistakes don't define who you are. You know, and I think for me, it's admitting that I don't know all the answers, but I will help you find them. You know, I don't have to know everything because I'm the adult either, but I'll help you.
If they're having thoughts of suicide, I'm just sorry, terribly sorry that they're feeling such pain. And that there are people around them that love them deeply and dearly, and who would love to help them overcome those obstacles so that they could once again work to help them overcome anything that's blocking them from feeling successful and loved and hope and happiness. And we would love to help you bounce back and be resilient and have the life you've dreamt about. So those people are there, and they're out there. And I'd love to be one of those folks for you. For your friends that are next to you that you've probably talked to, I'd say to you, please don't be silent. If you're thinking that that's the best way to be a friend, let somebody else know that your friend is struggling. Let them know that your friend is exhibiting some high-risk behaviors so that somebody could step in and help them, so that a couple days or weeks or months from now that we're not sitting here wondering what we could have done or should have done, so that together we can all have a brighter tomorrow as a community and a family. That's what I tell teens.
Those are really such beautiful messages, all of them. And I really appreciated that Marcia spoke not just to kids that are struggling with mental health, with thoughts of suicide. She talked to their friends. She talked to, you know, please, we're all here to help all of you.
Right.
All of you need
Absolutely.
our assistance as adults in your lives. All of you, you know, could use our assistance at some point. And I really appreciated that she spoke to both.
Me too. Oh, her message was just, it was during it was like
very
right in the heart. She speaks right from here. It was so, it was so beautiful. And she knows from experience. I think for me too, what I really appreciated was Mike was referring to adults make mistakes.
Yes.
Adults blow it. And I think using that language with kids, rather than always being on this pedestal of authority, right? This idea that we always have all of our shit together, or we always have all the answers. There is something so beautiful and refreshing when adults show up with kids and teens and go, I don't know. Maybe I don't have the answer, but I'm willing to work with you until we find one.
Yes.
Or I'm hopeful we will find a solution. There is something about adults stepping into that fallibility that we all have that teens will instantly respond to. They're going to go, right, because they don't expect it, right? We're always these authorities. And so I think when an authority figure shows up and says, but I don't always know, and I don't always have the answer, I mess things up.
Yeah.
I think it levels the playing fields for teens where I think they can step into some things in a different way than they might not otherwise be able to do.
For sure. And Laura even furthermore says, and it doesn't define you. Yeah. Your mistakes don't define you. Nothing that's happening right now defines your entire life. And so Mike, you know, and she really dovetailed together on that message.
We all make mistakes. We all do. Yeah, absolutely. So
thank you for joining us with this group. I know it was a longer video. They had so much material, and we just wanted to make sure to cover all of that with you. Next in our series is our toolbox. We've referred to it all the way through the series, and so Jen and I are really excited to just put together this collective wisdom and give you guys something that's resourceful that you can kind of tangibly hold on to from this.
So we'll see you next time.